Today we're joined by the CEO of Startup Catalyst, Aaron Birkby. Thank you, Aaron.
Thanks.
Aaron, can you share a little bit about the mission of Startup Catalyst and your focus areas?
Sure. So Startup Catalyst set up 4 years ago by Steve Baxter, and it's really in the business of reprogramming Australians, which sounds really bizarre, but the way we do that is we go to different international startup hotspots, Silicon Valley, Israel, Asia, the UK, with all different groups, but the goal is to actually make them realise that talent-wise, we are just as good here in Australia. We just need to think more globally, realise the pace of innovation overseas, and just get that aspiration to come back and actually really shift the dial of what is possible.
So you mentioned some of those economies that you visit, like Israel and the US. Which economies overseas inspire you and which Australians should be learning from in terms of how to build a successful tech company?
I think all the overseas economies really inspire me in different ways. There's lots of different lessons from each of them. I think in Israel, for example, I think the nature of their history and the adversity that they've faced means that they have a culture that is very fast-paced. Even conversations happen really fast, to the point that if you're not getting to your point, they'll interrupt you and say, "Excuse me, can you get to your point?" And it's not being rude, it's just the pace at which they move. Then in the US, it's different again. When we take Australians over to Silicon Valley, it's like they have to learn to repitch. So even though in most of the countries we visit, everyone speaks English, but the challenge is actually reframing how we have conversations. In Australia, we tend to do the big wind-up. If we were catching up, I'd ask you about your kids and everything else, and eventually I'd get to my conclusion. In the US, you have to start with the ask. You have to start with, why are we here? What are we talking about? And you also have to present, like in this traction sandwich, you have to present your numbers up front to build credibility, to keep people interested, just because of that pace at which everything happens in overseas markets. But outside that, many other lessons. I mean, this is what we do, is we go to markets, discover the gems in their ecosystems that we can bring back and really apply to the local economy.
If there was one thing you could change in Australia that would help expedite the growth of our tech ecosystem, what would that be?
Just one thing is actually really hard. But I think one thing I notice a lot is the difference in corporate Australia compared to corporates, for example, in Israel or the UK or other markets. I think we just haven't had the evolution yet where corporates actually, in Australia, don't fully understand the startup ecosystem and how to engage with technology companies. So in Israel, there are 350 multinational corporations who base their R&D teams there purely to invest in or acquire startups. Whereas in Australia, we struggle. I think most corporates still fixate on startups as a potential deal flow for future business, future clients. Whereas in places like Berlin, when we visit the Porsche digital labs, they look at startups as a model for open innovation. How do we actually collaborate with other entrepreneurs? How do we collaborate even with our competitors to end up being more innovative?
Given your observations overseas, what would you say, what areas does Australia have tech strength in?
I think our talent. I think we have world-class technical talent. So our universities are producing phenomenal graduates. We have some very smart expertise across AI, machine learning. We're seeing a lot of mechatronics, particularly coming out of WA at the moment. My challenge to that, though, is it's underutilised. So Professor Josh Lerner from Harvard did this really great study on the ecosystem here a couple of years ago, and he flagged that we're really good in the R&D landscape. We're really good at the R. We're really good at research. We're really good at technical talent. We just suck at commercialisation. We need to get better at the D. We need to actually take things out to the market, out to the world, and stop even thinking of Australia as a market, actually thinking global and going for that global scale.
So what are the things that would enable greater commercialisation here in Australia?
Definitely the corporate landscape, so having more corporates and enterprises coming on board as first clients for startups, doing partnerships for open innovation. But I think as well we need more entrepreneurs, more of our tech talent thinking globally. So I meet a lot of entrepreneurs and their global expansion plan is to go to Sydney. And I think we need to instead actually be getting on planes and go to international markets, landing and getting our first customer in the UK or in the US. So that global mindset and opening up, unlocking bigger populations, bigger density of markets would be transformational to our economy.
How do we keep Australian businesses here rather than establish themselves overseas?
Yeah, I think it's a fantastic question because we should be encouraging more companies to go global, but I think people automatically assume that means they have to go offshore. And the reality is we should keep our engineering rooms here. So we're now seeing a lot of startups where they'll base their go-to market teams, their sales teams, over in international markets. They'll be getting revenue from those markets. They might even be raising investment money in those markets. But they're keeping their engineering talent here in Australia. And that's for the R&D tax concessions. That's for the access to the talent because it is less competitive and our talent is world class. So I think we need more companies that do that. Raise your money, your revenue, your funding overseas, but actually spend it locally. building out amazing engineering talent, building out amazing development teams right here in Australia.
How's the venture capital landscape changed in the 4 years that Startup Catalyst has been around?
So there's been a lot more funds enter the venture capital market in Australia, and I think the funds have also become more sophisticated. So we're seeing many new funds setting up, particularly in the last 18 months. There's been a lot of new funds setting up, a lot of larger funds being established as well, but now also starting to see a lot more niching. So funds that are particularly focused on real tech, for example, so technology for the real estate and property sector, lots of health tech focus, fintech focus. And I think it's on trend with other markets. So if you look at the evolution of most startup ecosystems, they do progress from quite broad small funds into these larger niche funds, which is fantastic to see. They're also starting to bring more smarts with their money. So it's not just dumb money entering the market, it's actually sophisticated money coming with support, coming with market access, coming with expertise with it as well.
So given those insights, what would you say are the next big things in Aussie tech?
I'm not sure that I can predict it, and this is the beauty of technology. I mean, when Twitter started, it was an SMS service for couriers on bikes, and then it ended up becoming Twitter. And I think that's the exciting thing is, this concept of innovation means that we actually can't predict it. But I think the things that are getting really exciting are concepts like moving away from potentially coding ones and zeros for computers and coding into biology. I think there's going to be this big push into like a merge between technology and organisms. So that's exciting to see where that goes. I think AI and machine learning are just really at the cusp right now. I think that'll be transformative for a lot of industries, and I think that'll change the nature of work. I think many of us will move into more of the human skills, more of the emotional intelligence roles. So the dynamic of how we interact with technology is going to change significantly, particularly in the lifetime of my children.
Thanks for sharing your insights on today's CXO Report.
Thank you.